The email attachment loaded, displaying Carla, his wife, tangled on a hotel bed with another man. The camera zoomed slightly, catching her familiar laugh, a sound Frank had always loved, now mocking him from a cheap screen. His hands trembled, the cold beer can slipping from his grasp, his whole world shrinking to the cruel pixelated image. A voice, off-camera, chuckled. "Some people never learn, do they?" Frank Peterson sat in the worn patio chair, the aluminum cooler resting beside his bare foot. The afternoon sun, bright and persistent, warmed the concrete beneath him, but offered no comfort. He had poured the first beer a little after 3 o'clock, right after the email landed in his inbox. It was from Truth Seeker 07, a name he did not recognize. The subject line simply, Carla. His thumb had hovered over the delete button, assuming spam, before curiosity, a small, insidious thing, made him click. The attachment was a video file. He played it, sitting upright on the edge of the chair, his brow furrowed in expectation of some sales pitch. Instead, the screen filled with an unfamiliar hotel room, then with Carla. She was laughing, her hair spread across a pillow, and another man, a thick-set figure with a familiar tattoo on his forearm, was visible beside her. The clip was short, less than 30 seconds, but it left no room for doubt. Frank, a critical care nurse who had faced down more genuine emergencies than he could count, found himself entirely unprepared for this. His mind, usually a precise instrument for quick decisions, felt like a clogged drain. He thought about smashing the laptop, then about a confrontation, something loud and violent. But the faces of his 2 children, their innocent morning smiles, flashed in his mind. He pushed the thoughts away, took a long pull from the cold beer. A shadow fell across the patio. Brenda, his sister, stood at the edge of the concrete, her hands on her hips, a familiar stance. She had walked over from her identical house next door, their yards separated by a low, well-maintained privet hedge. "Frank, what's going on? Getting an early start, are we?" She asked, her voice carrying a usual mix of concern and sisterly teasing. She noticed the half-empty cooler. "You called me saying it was an emergency. I had to leave Mrs. Henderson mid-perm. You know how she gets." He reached into the cooler, pulled out another can, and popped the top. The hiss of the carbonation was loud in the quiet afternoon. He offered it to her without looking up. "Want one?" Brenda hesitated, then took it, her brows still furrowed. She sat in the other patio chair, the plastic protesting slightly under her weight. "So, the emergency. Is Mom okay? Did something happen to the kids?" Her questions came quickly, the usual easy camaraderie between them strained by the unusual quiet in his movements. Frank set his beer down on the concrete. He took a breath that felt like it scraped his throat. The words tasted like ash. "Carla is cheating on me." Brenda's hand, still holding the unopened beer, froze in midair. Her face, usually so animated, went slack for a moment. Then a flush of angry color rose in her cheeks. "No way," she said, her voice dropping. "Carla wouldn't. She's not like that." Frank just looked at her, then motioned towards the laptop still open on the table. He didn't need to say more. Brenda's eyes widened as she pieced together the unsaid details. "Well, I'll be damned. The nerve of that woman. Who is it? Who does she think she is? I'll pull her down on her bald head." Her voice grew louder with each word, her hand gesturing wildly. "I don't know who it is," Frank said, his voice flat. "The email was anonymous. The guy in the video, I don't know him." He left out the tattoo detail for now. He wanted to get through this first. Brenda was still sputtering, her face red, when her eyes, sweeping the patio, landed on his own face. The anger seemed to drain out of her instantly. Her eyes, usually so sharp, softened, then narrowed as she looked at him. Really looked at him. A different kind of fear, colder and more precise, began to etch itself around her mouth. She shook her head slowly, a barely perceptible motion. "No way," she whispered, the color completely gone from her face now. Her voice was thin, reedy, as if the air had been sucked out of her lungs. "It can't be." She paused, her gaze fixed on something distant, something only she could see. Her head swiveled back to him, her eyes pleading for a denial he couldn't offer. "She's cheating with my husband, Donnie." Frank reached out, gently touching her arm. His own hand felt heavy. He nodded once, a small, painful confirmation. Brenda stared at him, her lips trembling. He watched her swallow hard, the sound audible in the sudden stillness of the afternoon. He cleared his throat. "We need to act normal tonight. For the kids. We'll figure out a lawyer tomorrow." He felt a strange resolve settle over him, a cold, hard knot. The sun, dropping lower in the western sky, cast long shadows across Frank's lawn. He watched the light fade, the air growing cooler. "The kids," he started, his voice a low rumble. "Kevin, Mark, Billy, Sarah, Emily. All of them, close in age too." He gestured vaguely toward the twin houses. "They're still at Mom and Dad's, thankfully. None of them have any idea." It was a Tuesday. Mary and George Peterson, their parents, usually took all 5 grandkids for the afternoon, a weekly ritual that now seemed like a strange, protective shield. Brenda wiped a hand across her face, smudging some of her carefully applied makeup. "God, Frank, Donnie, I can't wrap my head around it." Her voice was tight, a tremor underneath the words. "He was always so reliable, you know? The kids loved him. My kids, your kids. He was a good uncle." She looked at her untouched beer can, then at Frank. "My stomach just dropped right out of me, Frank." Frank nodded. He remembered Donnie, broad-shouldered and patient, teaching Kevin how to bait a hook by the bayou behind their houses, the same bayou where they all used to fish as kids. Donnie was the kind of man who would drive across town to help you jumpstart your car or fix a leaky faucet without being asked. He had been a part of their family for over 2 decades. It added a layer of bewildering pain, trying to reconcile that image with the man in the video. "We need to be smart about this," Frank said, trying to push the personal pain aside, to focus on the practical, just as he would in an emergency room. "No yelling, not yet. We gather what we can, evidence." Brenda pushed a strand of hair behind her ear. "The money, Frank. What about the money? We're so tied up. The houses are practically on the same plot. Donnie's got his share in Fontano and Sons, the family business. My share too, from when Pop put us all in." Frank had purposely steered clear of Fontano and Sons, the family construction business, choosing the structured, life-saving world of nursing instead. He'd seen enough of the long hours, the constant negotiations, the way the business could consume a person. Now he wondered if that distance would prove a small advantage. "It's going to be messy," he conceded. "But we can't let them know we know. Not until we have everything lined up." "Who sent that email?" Brenda asked, a flicker of suspicion in her eyes. "Truth Seeker 07, does that mean anything to you?" Frank shook his head. "No, I've never seen that address. Could be anyone. Someone who knew, someone trying to cause trouble." He thought about it. Someone knew. Someone watched. The idea made his skin crawl. He had tried to ignore the subtle shifts in Carla, dismiss them as stress. Her new interest in a gym she rarely attended, the late-night work calls she took in the other room, the way her phone was always face down on the table. He remembered an expensive new perfume, a scent he didn't recognize, lingering on her clothes. He'd dismissed it as her trying to feel good about herself. Now, each small detail replayed in his mind, each a brick in a wall of lies. Brenda, her eyes distant, was tracing her own timeline of betrayal. "Donnie, too," she said almost to herself. "He's been working late a lot lately. New bids," he'd say, and his phone, always with him, always checking it. She chewed on her swim. "He got a new phone, said the old one was acting up. A brand new model. I thought nothing of it." "Phone records," Frank stated, his voice flat. "Bank statements, credit card activity. We need to look at everything, discreetly. If they're doing this, they're probably covering their tracks." He remembered the precise clinical way he'd review a patient's chart, looking for subtle signs of decline. This was no different, only the stakes were personal. "And Mom and Dad," Brenda said, her voice softer, "they can't handle this right now, not with everything else. Their parents were getting older, their health not as robust as it once was. The news would devastate them." Frank knew the burden of keeping this secret, even for a short time, would be heavy. Brenda took a deep breath, her shoulders straightening slightly. A spark, A flash of her usual stubborn resilience appeared in her eyes. "He won't get anything from me, Frank. Not a dime." He made his bed. They sat in silence then, the only sounds the distant drone of a lawnmower and the chirping of crickets beginning their evening chorus. The unspoken alliance born of betrayal solidified between them. The air grew heavy with unspoken plans, with the weight of the coming confrontation. Soon Carla and Donnie would be home, walking into a carefully constructed facade of normalcy, oblivious to the quiet storm brewing on their shared patio. The next morning, Frank and Brenda sat across a polished mahogany desk from Mr. Davies. The lawyer's office was quiet, the only sounds the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner and the rustle of papers as Mr. Davies reviewed the anonymous email and the brief, damning video Frank had provided. Mr. Davies was a man in his late 50s, his hair thinning, his expression usually placid. As he watched the video, his brow furrowed, a slow intake of breath audible. "Well," he said, placing Frank's laptop gently back on the desk, "this certainly complicates things." He leaned back in his chair, folding his hands. "Louisiana is a community property state. Everything acquired during the marriage generally is split equally. However, this video, this evidence of adultery, opens the door for a fault divorce." He explained the potential impact, the possibility of a more favorable outcome for the wronged party, particularly regarding spousal support and property division. "The children, of course, are paramount," Mr. Davies continued, looking between them. "Custody arrangements will be based on their best interests, regardless of fault." Frank nodded, his mind already calculating schedules, school pickups, the logistics of a divided life. "The land," Frank interjected, "and the houses. They were given to us generations ago. Family land." Mr. Davies clarified that inherited property, or property gifted before the marriage, typically remains separate property. However, any improvements or shared expenses on that land could complicate matters. Brenda, ever practical, cut to her core concern. "Donnie won't be able to touch my share of the business, will he? Or take anything from the kids?" Mr. Davies assured her they would fight to protect her assets and the children's future. He then outlined their homework. "You need to document everything," he instructed, his voice firm. "Dates, times any texts, emails, receipts, anything that shows a pattern of behavior. Be discreet. Do not, under any circumstances, let Carla or Donnie suspect you know. If they find out, they'll scrub everything. It'll be a lot harder to build your case." Frank and Brenda left the office a little before noon, the bright sunlight outside a stark contrast to the grim reality they were now facing. They felt a fragile sense of empowerment, the first glimmer of control, but it was heavily mixed with dread. The path ahead was clear but daunting. Back at their respective houses, they began the painstaking process of sifting through their lives. Frank started with Carla's phone, which she often left charging in the kitchen at night. He moved slowly, methodically, like a surgeon. He found a second messaging app, one not on the home screen, disguised as a utility icon. Inside, coded messages, pet names, and references to Our Spot and Our Secret. He found emails from obscure hotel chains, confirmations of rooms booked weeks in advance. He even found a separate, hidden bank account, opened online, with small but regular deposits and withdrawals. It was all there, laid bare. Next door, Brenda was just as methodical. She found a credit card statement tucked away in Donnie's sock drawer, hidden under a pile of old t-shirts. Unusual charges, an expensive restaurant he'd never taken her to, a weekend stay at a resort hotel, a jewelry store he'd claimed was for client gifts. She cross-referenced the dates with his late nights and business trips. The pattern was horrifyingly consistent. They shared a late-night, hushed phone call, the children asleep in their beds. "I found hotel bills," Brenda whispered, her voice tight with suppressed anger. "And a new credit card account I didn't know about. He's been moving money around." "Same here," Frank replied, his own voice low. "Coded messages, a secret app. This has been going on for months, Brenda. Maybe longer." The realization that they had been living a lie for so long, oblivious, added another sharp twist to the knife in their gut. The betrayal was deeper, more calculated than they had initially imagined. They ended the call, the silence of their separate houses heavy with the weight of their discoveries and their hardened resolve. The plan for the confrontation was precise, rehearsed over whispered phone calls. It was Friday evening. The children, Kevin, Mark, Billy, Sarah, and Emily, had been dropped off at Mary and George Peterson's house. Frank had told them it was a surprise weekend adventure with Grandma and Grandpa, watching their excited faces with a lead weight in his stomach. "Carla," Frank had said earlier, his voice carefully neutral, "can we talk tonight after the kids are gone? Something serious." She'd agreed, her tone unconcerned, a slight note of curiosity. Next door, Brenda had called Donnie. "Frank wants us to come over tonight," she said, making it sound casual. "Said he had something to show us, maybe a new fishing lure or something." Donnie, too, had agreed without suspicion. Now, Frank sat on his patio, Brenda beside him. The evening air was still, humid. Carla walked over first, a light sweater draped over her shoulders. She smiled, a little wary. "What's all this about, Frank? You look like you're about to deliver bad news in an emergency room." Moments later, Donnie walked up, a can of beer in his hand. He greeted them with a nod. "Hey, what's up? Brenda said you had something important." He looked at the tense silence, a flicker of unease crossing his face. Frank took a slow breath, the air thick in his lungs. He looked at Carla, then at Donnie. "I received an email a few days ago," he began, his voice calm, deliberate, as if explaining a medical procedure. It was anonymous, from Truth Seeker Zurich 7. Carla's easy smile faltered. Her eyes, usually so bright, narrowed slightly, searching his face. Donnie, still standing, shifted his weight. "It contained a video," Frank continued, watching Carla's face, which was slowly draining of color. "Of you, Carla, and Donnie." Carla's confusion curdled into immediate dread. She shook her head, a quick, jerky motion. "Frank, what are you talking about? This is ridiculous." Brenda leaned forward, her hands clenched on her knees. Her voice trembled, but held steady. "Donnie, I found hotel receipts, bank statements, a credit card you'd opened that I knew nothing about." She held up a small stack of papers, her hand shaking. "Charges for places you said you were working late or out of town on business." Donnie scoffed, a forced laugh. "Brenda, what is this? Are you losing your mind?" "This is Frank's drama, not ours. You're being irrational." He glanced at Frank, a challenge in his eyes, as if expecting Frank to rein in his sister. Carla, seizing the opportunity, rallied. "Frank, this is a cruel joke. Some anonymous email? Anyone can make a fake video these days. You know how crazy Brenda gets." She tried to meet his gaze, but her eyes kept darting away. Frank reached for his laptop, which was sitting on the patio table. He opened it, navigated to the file, and without a word pressed play. The sound of Carla's distinctive laugh filled the quiet evening air, followed by Donnie's gruff voice. The short clip played, showing their intimate interaction, leaving no room for denial, no space for doubt. The screen reflected in their stunned faces. Donnie's jaw went slack. Carla stared, her mouth slightly open, her carefully constructed facade crumbling. The initial shock gave way to a wave of something uglier. "You always were so sloppy, Donnie," Carla hissed, turning on him. "Couldn't keep your mouth shut, could you? Or your hands to yourself." Donnie bristled. "Me? You were the one practically throwing yourself at me, Carla. Always looking for attention, so always wanting more." Brenda cut through their bickering, her voice cold and sharp, a stark contrast to her earlier tremble. "You won't get a fine, Donnie. Not from me. Not from this family. You won't get a thing." Her gaze was unwavering, filled with a resolve that silenced him. Frank closed his laptop with a quiet click. "This marriage is over, Carla," he stated, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "Brenda and I have already met with an attorney. We have a solid case for fault divorce. You won't be taking anything that doesn't belong to you." Carla and Donnie stared at them, their faces a mixture of anger, shock, and dawning realization. They were exposed, cornered. The silence that followed was heavy, thick with the weight of shattered trust and impending ruin. Frank felt a bitter satisfaction, a grim sense of having taken the first necessary step in a long, painful process. The battle was far from over, but the initial volley had been fired. After the confrontation, Carla retreated to her house, the door slamming shut. A hollow sound in the evening, quiet. Donnie, after a few minutes of stunned silence, followed suit, his usual confident stride replaced by a defeated shuffle. Frank and Brenda remained on the patio for a while longer, the remnants of the cold beer cans between them, the silence heavy with the taste of victory and ash. They had won the first battle, but the war stretched out before them, long and arduous. They tried to maintain a united front, but the strain of the deception began to show. The next day, when the children returned from Mary and George's, the tension in both houses was palpable. It hung in the air, a silent, oppressive weight the kids, with their uncanny instincts, picked up on immediately. Kevin, Frank's eldest, a boy of 12 who noticed everything, watched Carla. She moved through the house with a quiet, almost mournful demeanor, her usual easy laughter absent. He watched Frank too, seeing the grim set of his jaw, the way his eyes seemed distant even when he was looking right at him. "Dad?" Kevin asked one evening, finding Frank in the garage. "Is Mom okay? Is everything okay?" Frank offered a vague answer about grown-up problems, a flimsy shield against the boy's sharp gaze. Next door, Mark, Brenda's kid's son, a year younger than Kevin, confronted his mother directly. "Mom, why is Dad sleeping in the guest room? Did he do something wrong?" Donnie had been banished to the spare bedroom, a silent decree from Brenda. Brenda struggled to explain, offering platitudes about needing space, about adults sometimes having arguments. Emily and Sarah, usually inseparable, became distant, their whispered conversations taking on a hushed, anxious tone. They played less, watched more, their small faces reflecting the growing unease. Frank and Brenda spent hours carefully crafting explanations for the children, vague about the specifics of the betrayal, but honest about the coming changes. They spoke of parents needing time apart, of love sometimes changing shape, of the most important thing being the children's well-being. It felt like talking around a burning building, trying to describe the smoke without mentioning the flames. Mary and George, their parents, sensed the deep currents beneath the surface. They called more often, dropped by unannounced, their questions becoming less subtle, more pointed. "Is everything all right with Carla, Frank? She seems a bit quiet lately." Or to Brenda, "Donnie hasn't been around much. Is he still working those long hours?" One afternoon, Carla found Frank alone in the kitchen. Her eyes were red-rimmed. "Frank," she whispered, her voice a desperate plea, "please, I'm so sorry. It was a mistake. A terrible, stupid mistake. He manipulated me. Donnie, he's a snake." She reached for his arm, but he pulled away, the touch feeling like a burn. He just looked at her, his face a mask of cold resolve. Meanwhile, Donnie, ever the charmer, tried his hand with Brenda. He called, he showed up at her door, flowers in hand. "Brenda, honey, please. I messed up. I know I did. Give me another chance. I love you. You know that. You're still young. You need a reliable man." Brenda listened, her face expressionless, then closed the door, the bouquet still in his hand. The whispers began in the small community. Heads turned in the grocery store. Friends called, fishing for information. The twin houses, once symbols of familial harmony, now stood as silent monuments to discord. Frank came across Kevin's laptop one evening, finding his search history. What happens in a divorce? Custody laws, Louisiana. The children were piecing it together, and it was breaking his heart. Brenda had a tearful conversation with Sarah, her youngest daughter, who asked, her voice small and trembling, "Does Daddy not love us anymore, Mama?" Brenda held her daughter close, trying to soothe a wound she couldn't heal. Finally, Mary and George could no longer ignore the undeniable tension. They called Frank and Brenda over, their faces grim. "What is going on?" Mary demanded, her voice firm. "We're not fools. We can feel it. What's happening?" Frank and Brenda looked at each other, a shared, heavy sigh passing between them. The time for pretense was over. "Mom, Dad," Frank began, his voice low. "Carla and Donnie, they've been having an affair." The news hit them like a physical blow. Mary gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. George's face, usually ruddy and good-natured, turned a shocking shade of red. The ensuing silence was filled with disbelief, heartbreak, and then a slow, simmering outrage. Stick around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold. The formal legal documents were filed on a Monday morning. Within days, the news, like a fast-moving current, swept through their small, interconnected community. It wasn't just gossip, it was a shockwave. Neighbors who had seen Frank and Carla, Brenda and Donnie, as the picture of stability, now whispered behind cupped hands. Frank found himself fielding uncomfortable questions at the grocery store, enduring pitying glances from parents at school pickup. At the hospital, his colleagues offered hushed words of support, some sharing their own quiet tales of betrayal, reminding him he wasn't alone in this particular kind of pain. Carla and Donnie, on the other hand, found themselves abruptly isolated. Social invitations ceased. Donnie's usual jovial greetings were met with cold stares from his own cousins, many of whom worked with him at Fontano and Sons. Carla, who had once been so vibrant in their social circles, now walked with her head down, the weight of public judgment a heavy cloak. Brenda navigated the gossip with a quiet dignity, finding solace in the unwavering support of her parents and a few trusted friends who saw beyond the rumors to the real hurt. She spent evenings talking with Mary, her mother, who offered a fierce, protective love and a steady hand. Carla attempted to reconcile with her children, baking their favorite cookies, offering extra hugs. But Kevin and Emily particularly were wary, their confusion evident in their hesitant responses. Donnie, meanwhile, tried to leverage his position in the family construction business, creating tension and arguments with his cousins, who were disgusted by his actions and worried about the implications for the company. The family business, once a source of pride, was now a battleground. Frank and Brenda's attorneys began the meticulous process of asset division. The financial irregularities they had uncovered earlier now became stark, undeniable facts. Hotel bills, credit card statements, transfers between accounts, all laid bare. It was clear that the affair hadn't just been an emotional cost, it had been a significant financial drain, a betrayal of their shared resources. Then another email arrived, from Truth Seeker 07. This time it wasn't just a video, it contained a detailed list of dates, specific hotel names, and even flight numbers for weekend trips Carla and Donnie had taken, all while claiming to be on separate work trips or visiting family. This new information was a crucial piece of the puzzle, solidifying Frank and Brenda's legal position, leaving no room for their spouses to deny the premeditated nature of their affair. The relentless stress began to take a toll on Frank's health. Sleep became elusive, his nights filled with restless thoughts, replaying conversations, dissecting past events. At work, his concentration, usually razor-sharp, wavered. He found himself double-checking dosages, staring blankly at charts, his mind adrift. Brenda, too, struggled. Bouts of anger would consume her, followed by waves of deep depression. She mourned not just the loss of her marriage, but the loss of trust, the shattered image of the man she had loved for decades. The children, perhaps the most vulnerable casualties, began to show the cracks in their own foundations. Kevin's grades, usually impeccable, started to slip. Mark became sullen and withdrawn, lashing out at his siblings. Emily and Sarah, once bright and talkative, grew quiet, their imaginative play replaced by nervous glances and whispered anxieties. Frank found a note from Kevin's teacher, expressing concern over his recent lack of focus. Brenda received a similar call about Mark. Seeing the visible impact on their children, Frank and Brenda made another united decision. They committed to family counseling for all 5 children, prioritizing their emotional well-being above all else. It was a recognition that while their adult lives were in upheaval, the children deserved every chance to navigate this storm with as much support and healing as possible. The legal battles were important, but their children's hearts were paramount. The divorce proceedings intensified, quickly spiraling into a bitter legal battle. What had started as betrayal now morphed into open hostility, played out in sterile courtrooms and through sharp-tongued legal documents. Carla and Donnie, united in their desperation, tried every tactic to discredit Frank and Brenda. They accused them of conspiracy, of emotional instability, of fabricating evidence. Frank sat through these accusations, his face impassive, a quiet rage simmering beneath the surface. Frank's attorney, Mr. Davies, methodically used the video evidence and the anonymous emails to establish Carla's fault. Each piece of evidence chipped away at her claims of innocence, painting a clear picture of deliberate infidelity. This would significantly impact her eventual settlement. Brenda's legal team, equally thorough, meticulously dissected Donnie's financial dealings, unearthing hidden accounts and attempts to siphon money from the family construction business. His carefully constructed web of deceit unraveled under their scrutiny. The shared property, the family land that had been passed down through generations, became a particularly ugly point of contention. Donnie, despite having no legal claim, attempted to assert a stake, arguing he had invested time and effort into its upkeep. Frank listened to these arguments, remembering all the weekends he and Donnie had spent fixing fences, clearing brush, working side by side. The irony was a bitter pill. Frank and Brenda endured grueling court appearances, facing not just the public humiliation of their spouse's actions, but also the scrutiny of the judge, the lawyers, and the small-town press. The children, despite Frank and Brenda's best efforts to shield them, were inevitably drawn into the proceedings. Their testimonies were carefully managed by the court-appointed counselor, minimizing their direct exposure to the painful details. But the impact was undeniable. The financial strain of legal fees began to weigh heavily. Even with careful planning, the costs mounted, each filing, each hearing, a drain on their resources. Frank picked up extra shifts at the hospital, his weary body protesting the added hours. In her desperation, Carla began to manipulate Emily, her youngest daughter. She whispered half-truths, painting Frank as the villain, blaming him for the family's unhappiness. Emily, confused and vulnerable, started to pull away from Frank, her innocent questions replaced by guarded silence. It was a cruel tactic, twisting the knife where it hurt most. Donnie, facing financial ruin and social ostracization, made thinly veiled threats against Brenda and her family, hinting at consequences if she didn't back down. Brenda, though frightened, stood firm. Frank discovered a final galling betrayal. Carla had been systematically siphoning money from their joint savings account, small amounts over many months, totaling a significant sum. This new discovery added criminal charges to the already complex divorce, further hardening Frank's resolve. Brenda, meanwhile, received an eviction notice for Donnie from the rental property owned by Fontano and Sons, a clear message from their cousins that he was no longer welcome, neither personally nor professionally. The emotional toll on Frank and Brenda was immense. Sleep became a luxury, their quiet moments filled with gnawing anxiety. Yet, through it all, they found strength in each other. Their shared ordeal forged a new unbreakable bond, and their parents, Mary and George, remained their unwavering anchor, offering practical help, emotional support, and a steady, loving presence. Finally, after months of legal wrangling, the judge delivered the ruling. Citing overwhelming evidence of infidelity and financial misconduct, the judge ruled mostly in favor of Frank and Brenda. Carla's claims for spousal support were denied, and Donnie's attempts to secure a larger portion of assets were thwarted. Frank and Brenda were awarded primary custody of their children, a small but significant victory in a battle that had cost them so much. The divorces were finalized. The paperwork was signed, the assets divided, the court orders issued. But the emotional wounds, Frank knew, would take far longer to heal. They remained raw, deep, a constant ache beneath the surface of daily life. Carla, stripped of her claims and facing the community's scorn, packed her bags and left the family home. She moved out of state to a city where no one knew her name. Her relationship with the children was severely damaged, reduced to infrequent, strained phone calls and awkward, supervised visits. Donnie, his reputation shattered, his assets significantly reduced, and his ties to Fontano and Sons severed, was forced to leave town. He tried to restart his life in a new place, away from the constant reminder of his undoing. Frank found himself grappling with a profound loneliness. The quiet of the house after the kids were asleep was a stark reminder of Carla's absence, even if that absence was a necessary outcome. He was learning to be a single parent, navigating the complex schedules of 3 children, juggling work and home life, the constant demands a heavy weight. Brenda faced her own challenges, reestablishing her independence after decades of marriage, slowly trying to rebuild her trust in others. It was a slow, deliberate process, like learning to walk again after a long illness. The children coped in their own ways, Kevin, once so focused, still struggled with his grades but found an outlet in basketball, channeling his frustration into aggressive play. Mark became quieter, retreating into books and video games. Emily and Sarah, after much counseling, began to express their anger and sadness, sometimes through tears, sometimes through defiant outbursts. The family counseling sessions, initially difficult, became a regular necessary part of their lives, a safe space to process the grief, confusion, and anger that simmered within them. Frank and Brenda found themselves navigating the complicated waters of co-parenting with uncooperative ex-spouses. Carla would often cancel visits at the last minute, or Donnie would try to undermine Brenda's authority with the kids. It was another layer of frustration, another reminder of the disrespect that had started this whole ordeal. The community slowly moved on, the initial shock fading into everyday chatter, but the memory of the scandal lingered like a shadow. Relationships were altered, some friends choosing sides, others keeping a polite distance. Frank found solace in the outdoors, rediscovering his passion for fishing and hiking, taking his kids with him whenever he could. He taught Kevin how to cast a line, watched Emily marvel at a butterfly, finding a quiet kind of healing in nature. Brenda, too, found new outlets. She started a pottery class at the community center, molding clay with her hands, a tangible act of creation in a life that had felt so broken. It was a focus on personal growth, a quiet act of self-reliance. Mary and George, their parents, remained steadfast, providing a stable, loving environment for their grandchildren, bridging the emotional gaps, ensuring the kids knew they were loved unconditionally. Slowly, carefully, Kevin, Mark, Billy, Sarah, and Emily began to mend their own relationships. Their shared experience, their cousin bond, became a source of strength. They played together, whispered secrets, and comforted each other in ways their parents couldn't. Frank and Brenda shared quiet moments of reflection on the patio, often after the kids were asleep, a cup of coffee steaming between them. They spoke of the profound impact of their shared ordeal, the pain it had caused, the lessons it had taught. The marriages were over, irrevocably so. But their bond as siblings, forged in the fires of crisis and betrayal, was stronger than ever. They were survivors, scarred but resilient, ready to face whatever came next together. Years folded into decades. Frank and Brenda still lived next door. Their houses, once twin symbols of shared family life, now stood as monuments to resilience. The children, grown into young adults, navigated their difficult upbringing with varying success. Kevin excelled in college. Mark, after some wandering, joined the family construction business, bringing new energy. Billy and Sarah pursued their own paths, forever changed but moving forward. Emily, though still carrying her quiet scars, found her own voice and strength. Frank occasionally dated, but remained cautious, prioritizing the steady peace he'd found in his children's stability. Brenda discovered new purpose in her career and community involvement, building a life defined by her own choices. Carla made sporadic attempts to reconnect, but the trust remained irrevocably broken. Donnie faded into obscurity, his legacy defined by the ruin he'd brought upon himself. They never learned who Truth Seeker 7 was. The anonymous email remained an unsolved piece of the puzzle. Frank and Brenda often spoke of the profound ripple effect of infidelity, not just on spouses, but across generations. The bayou still flowed behind their houses, the ancient oak trees still stood, marking the passage of time and the quiet, persistent healing. Frank watched his children grow, a bittersweet recognition of their journey. Brenda, looking out over the water, found a quiet acceptance. Some scars never fully disappear, but they could be lived with. The price had been paid, and they had found a way to carry on.